The sun rose over the scorched plains of Normandy, painting the sky with the faint glow of storm clouds. In the silence of that dawn, a wave of thoughts swept across the minds of soldiers, commanders, and historians alike, a reminder of the moment that history was forged. There, amid the tangled lines of American forces advancing, a new era had begun. One where the speed and reach of modern technology would change the face of war forever. The voices of those who led the charge echoed in the wind, their commands shaping the destiny of nations. Across the battle lines, men in worn uniforms stood together, not fought for glory, but for survival, purpose, and the memory of what would come. Behind them, the distant rumble of tanks pushed forward, their treads swallowing the earth as they rolled deep into the heart of German territory. The weight of history rested heavy upon these ranks, for they were testaments to courage, sacrifice, and the relentless march toward victory. Every step they took was a testament to the strategies of visionary leaders like Eisenhower and Churchill, whose decisions would ripple across the globe. The streets of Normandy shimmered with the promise of a new chapter, one where the pages of old would be rewritten by men and machines they could not yet comprehend. Above, in the sky, a massive formation of bombers took to flight, casting long shadows over the battlefield below. The sky itself seemed to tremble with the weight of history as these giants of steel and technology prepared to strike. Farther away, the hum of radio signals and the focus of radio operators filled the air, guiding the rollout of aircraft destined to change the course of warfare. The war room, with its maps and charts, pulsed with urgency, each line and symbol a reminder of the decisions made centuries ago. Soldiers, civilians, and historians alike watched intently, aware that today, history was unfolding with a speed and impact never before seen. The sky over the English Channel was a dense swarm of black silhouettes as the RAF's Bomber Command assembled for the next wave of night raids, each aircraft flanked by the faint hum of radio operators broadcasting navigation fixes to the formation. In those moments, the crews of the Avro Lancaster and the de Havilland Mosquito learned to trust a new kind of signal, coded pulses that guided their payloads with unprecedented precision, a technique that would later blossom into the remote-controlled bombing systems tested at the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1943. Engineers there fitted a Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver with a crude television guidance link, allowing a ground controller in a concrete bunker to steer the aircraft toward a target hidden behind cloud cover, a test that proved the feasibility of unmanned aerial delivery and sparked interest across the Allied command structure. Below the formation, the ruins of the French villages bore the scars of relentless artillery, and the shattered church spires served as natural markers for the incoming aircraft. As the bombers crossed the coastline, the Germans responded with a swarm of their own experimental weapons. The Henschel H's 293 glide bomb, a sleek, cigar-shaped projectile launched from a Heinkel He-111 and guided by radio commands that kept it on a straight path toward Allied shipping in the Bay of Biscay. The first successful strike on a British destroyer at the Battle of the Bay of Biscay demonstrated that a guided munition could outmaneuver conventional anti-aircraft fire, cementing the concept of smart weapons in the minds of both Axis and Allied planners. The success of the H's 293 did not go unnoticed by the Allies. In early 1944, a team of engineers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, working under contract with the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, began modifying the Kettering Bug's airframe to carry a small radio transmitter capable of receiving a 10 megacycle command tone. When the modified Bug was launched from a coastal launch pad near the English town of Aldershot, it followed a pre-programmed trajectory that dropped a miniature high-explosive payload onto a mock enemy tank position, a demonstration that convinced senior officers that unmanned flight could be a force multiplier on the battlefield. The project, codenamed Project Sunset, was kept secret, but its principles filtered back to the planning rooms of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force SAF as they prepared for the upcoming invasion of the Philippine archipelago. Across the Atlantic, the Pacific Theater provided a stark laboratory for the same ideas. In the coral-strewn islands of the Central Pacific, U.S. Marine Corps engineers deployed the Lowenstein radio-controlled target drone to simulate Japanese kamikaze attacks during training exercises on Kwajalein Atoll. The drone, a scaled-down version of the German Fritz X glide bomb, was launched from a catapult, flew a predetermined course, and detonated over a mock fleet of landing craft, giving the Marines a realistic sense of the threat they would soon face. The data gathered from those tests informed the development of the Bay-29 Superfortress remotely operated gun turrets, which allowed gunners in the aircraft's pressurized cabin to fire at enemy fighters without leaving their stations. an early form of human-in-the-loop control that would later be fully mechanized in post-war drone designs. As the invasion of Normandy unfolded, the battlefields below became a living archive of these experiments. In the quarries of Utah Beach, engineers installed a makeshift command post where a radio operator, using a portable VHF set, transmitted a series of coded pulses that guided a withdrawn convoy of B-24 bombers to drop a payload of 500-pound bombs on a hidden German supply depot perched on the cliffs above the beach. The precision of the strike was later celebrated in Allied briefings as the first coordinated use of remote guidance to suppress enemy artillery positioning, a tactic that would be refined and reused throughout the war in the Pacific, Italy, and later in the Korean conflict. When the war finally ended, the captured German HS-293 and HS-294 guided bomb schematics were handed over to the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, spurring a race to integrate guided weaponry into every branch of the armed forces. In the aftermath, the newly formed United States Air Force established the Air Research and Development Command at Wright Field, Ohio, where teams of engineers began experimenting with jet-propelled target drones for training pilots and testing missile guidance systems. These early efforts laid the groundwork for the Cold War era's Firefly and Peregrine projects, which would eventually culminate in the development of the RQ-1 Predator and later the MQ-9 Reaper, weapons whose lineage can be traced directly back to the radio-controlled experiments conducted over the smoky skies of Normandy and the Coral Islands of the Pacific. The war that began with marching infantry and thunderous artillery thus concluded with a silent promise. The sky would no longer be the sole domain of men in cockpits, but a contested space where unseen operators could steer machines toward targets with surgical accuracy. The lessons learned from the HS-293's glide, the Kettering Bug's flight, and the radio-guided bombings of Utah Beach echoed through decades of conflict, shaping doctrines that placed unmanned systems at the heart of modern warfare. As historians now sift through the archives of wartime photographs, showing swarms of bombers, the metallic glint of guided bombs streaking toward their marks, and the grim faces of soldiers watching these new weapons rise, they recognize a single, undeniable truth. The crucible of World War II forged the technological and strategic foundations that made drones the most powerful weapon of the 21st century. The echoes of those early, daring experiments still reverberate across today's battlefields, reminding us that every revolution in war begins with a single, daring flight. On the dry runways of Edwards Air Force Base, jet target drones taxied beneath the glare of the California sun, while early Cold War fighters circled overhead. The Ryan Firebee, first flown in 1951, became one of the most important unmanned aircraft of its generation. It was built to be shot at, tracked, and studied. To commanders, that made it more than a training tool. It proved that an aircraft could fly without a pilot and still serve a military purpose. In 1960, the danger of sending men into defended airspace became impossible to ignore. A Soviet surface-to-air missile brought down Francis Gary Powers' U-2 over Sverdlovsk, and the captured pilot became a global symbol of Cold War risk. Washington understood the lesson quickly. Reconnaissance was essential, but every flight over hostile territory carried the danger of capture, death, or political crisis. Unmanned aircraft suddenly looked less like experiments and more like a strategic answer. By the mid-1960s, modified Firebees became the Ryan Model 147 Lightning Bug, later designated the AQM-34. During Operation Rolling Thunder and Operation Linebacker, these drones flew over North Vietnam, Laos, and China, carrying cameras and electronic sensors. Launched from DC-130 Hercules aircraft and sometimes recovered in mid-air by helicopters, they crossed territory too dangerous for many manned missions. Defense Secretary Robert S. McNamara's Pentagon valued technology as a way to reduce risk, and the Lightning Bug fit that vision. More than 3,000 sorties later, many machines were lost, but no pilot was taken prisoner. Vietnam also showed a second truth. Drones were not only weapons, but eyes. Their photographs and signals intelligence helped commanders understand air defenses, supply routes, and troop movements. The footage was grainy, the systems were fragile, and recovery was uncertain, but the concept was clear. A machine could enter hostile airspace, gather information, and return that knowledge without putting a crew in the cockpit. Across the world, Israel drew similar lessons from its own wars. After the 1973 conflict exposed the danger posed by dense Soviet-style air defenses, Israeli engineers at Tataran and Israel Aircraft Industries refined small reconnaissance drones such as the Mastiff, Scout, and Pioneer. These machines were not fast or glamorous. They were practical, rugged, and built for survival over battlefields where radar and missiles ruled the sky. In June 1982, above Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, that doctrine was tested in combat. Israeli Air Force drones flew ahead of strike aircraft, drawing Syrian radar into the open and transmitting live information to command centers and E-2 Hawkeye airborne warning aircraft. Syrian surface-to-air missile batteries were located, jammed, and attacked in a coordinated campaign that became one of the clearest early examples of drone-enabled battlefield control. The United States watched closely. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the RQ-5 Pioneer drone flew from naval vessels, including the battleship USS Wisconsin, to spot targets and adjust naval gunfire over Kuwait and Iraq. Marine accounts later described Iraqi soldiers on Failaka Island surrendering to a Pioneer circling overhead, a strange image that captured a new reality of war. The machine carried no bombs, yet its presence had the force of command. In the Balkans, the Predator entered a new stage. Developed by General Atomics from earlier work by engineer Abraham Karam, including the Amber and Knot 750 programs, the Predator carried cameras that could watch roads, bridges, and troop movements for hours. During the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo, and later under Operation Allied Force, it gave commanders a persistent view of the battlefield. It was still mainly a reconnaissance aircraft, but its endurance made it valuable in a way fighter jets could not match. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, that role changed. In Afghanistan, under Operation Enduring Freedom, the CIA and the U.S. Air Force began flying armed Predators equipped with Hellfire missiles. In November 2001, a CIA-operated Predator fired on an al-Qaeda vehicle convoy near Kandahar, marking one of the first combat uses of an armed drone. The line between surveillance and strike had moved. A machine that once watched the battlefield could now decide, through human command, where to strike. By 2007, the MQ-9 Reaper entered combat service, carrying heavier weapons and more advanced sensors. In Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Syria, drones became central to counterterrorism operations under administrations led by George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Presidents, intelligence chiefs, and military commanders relied on them because they offered persistence, speed, and distance. Yet they also raised difficult questions about sovereignty, civilian risk, accountability, and the meaning of war when the operator sits far from the target. The revolution did not belong to one country alone. In the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War, Azerbaijan used Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drones and Israeli Harop loitering munitions against Armenian armored vehicles and air defenses. The footage was stark, drones circling above open terrain, identifying targets, and calling in precision strikes. It was a warning that unmanned systems had moved from elite militaries to regional conflicts. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, drones appeared everywhere. Ukrainian forces used Bayraktar TB2 aircraft in the early weeks, while small DJI quadcopters helped artillery crews correct fire. Russian Lancet loitering munitions,